Hello everyone. Can you hear me? Can I get like a yes, lovely to see. So I'm Will, not one of the chaps that you can see up here, but the person on the right there, he was just on stage, he's Damo, he's my co-founder, and together we set up the Making Money podcast together. I've also been involved with launching a couple of other different podcasts, top 10 shows, and I'm here to basically explain the different ways that you can use podcasting to build your business. So there are some unique characteristics with podcasting which are worth bearing in mind. It is a really trustworthy channel. So they've done lots of tests which have basically shown if you want to lie to somebody, don't do it through audio. It's much easier to lie to somebody through video. There's something about like the clarity of it, of only having somebody's words in your ears, that means you can pick up on any fibbing. And so it engenders itself to trust. If you work in an industry where trust is important, podcasting can help. It's also obviously long form, people spending 30, 60, 90 minutes listening to somebody talking, and you get a much deeper engagement, of course, than when you're just scrolling and getting your little dopamine hit on social. Some say, Trump won the last election because he went on Joe Rogan. I'm not sure about that, but I'll take it in this format. And then education. So podcasting, along with YouTube, is really where most people go to learn, certainly if they want to learn anything with a bit of nuance and that's a bit long form. So if you're in B2B, for instance, and you need to teach people to do with your space, check out podcasting. It's got deep engagement too, so about a third of people in Europe spend 7 hours a week listening to podcasts, so it's basically a work day. There's 3 ways, generally, that you can leverage podcasts to build your business. You can create your own, you can appear as a guest, and of course you can advertise or sponsor. Can I get a little show of hands for who here has tried at least one of these things in a business capacity? Nice. And can you keep your hands up, if it actually worked? Yeah, about 50-50, Okay, I'm hopefully going to give you some tips if you're considering doing any of these things. So how these approaches work? Let's talk about creating your own. This is something to consider if you operate in a real trust-dependent sector, which might be like healthcare, finance, or something like that. And you should also think about like where podcasting can be in your conversion funnel. It's not just attracting leads, it's about converting them. So in this case, my surrogacy journey, there's few sort of consumer choices which are as heavy on trust as like who you're going to work with to bring your child into the world. So they use their podcast not top of funnel, but mid funnel for when you're in their ecosystem to introduce you to who they are as people, because it is such a trustworthy medium. Or you can go and guest on shows. The guy here, Daniel Priestley, he's everywhere at the moment in the UK. He says that, his appearances on Diary of a CEO have generated $10 million for him. Good for him. And then the reason to consider advertising on podcasts is because on average, it delivers better return on advertising spend than the other key channels. Even though the CPMs might be higher, because you've got that trust factor and higher engagement effectively. So let's now dive into the different areas. We're going to look at creating your own podcast. Honestly, I think this should only be done by sort of a limited subset of businesses. It can work though, so this is Zoe. They're often, top 10 health and sort of health and wellness in the charts. They're basically a VC-backed startup that are trying to help with nutrition. And they've made it work to the extent that they're always up there, and they've actually bought the podcast company that made them. But the brutal reality is most podcasts fail, including business podcasts. Nearly half of podcasts, about 44%, don't make it past 3 episodes. And that's because they underestimate things like the cost, time, effort really, to get a podcast going, to give it the traction. So it's kind of how long's a piece of string with cost, but $1,000 to $5,000 an episode. That obviously starts adding up if you're getting, like 20, 30, 40 a year. It also takes months to make and market podcasts. You've got to find the guests, brief them, interview them, edit, release. And I also think, being brutally honest, that a lot of businesses don't intrinsically have like the content value to be able to sustain, a popular podcast, into the hundreds of episodes. It's also weird marketing podcasts. It's its own little world, which we'll talk about now. But basically, one of the big issues with podcasting is its discoverability. So all the other digital media channels, they spend millions, tens of millions, on creating algorithms to keep you there as a consumer. In podcasts, that doesn't happen. So the main way that people find podcasts is if you're getting featured on the homepage, or if you're like top of the charts, which makes it quite difficult to sort of like deliberately go about marketing it. And in fact, the biggest channel that you would use, was still the biggest channel today for podcast growth, is word of mouth. So your chart position is key, but there's very few silver bullets that are going to get you there. One of them, you can get featured by Apple. The one thing I often hear from people outside of podcasting is that, we're going to clip stuff up, put it on social, and that will drive audio success. None of our tests have shown that, and pretty much all the podcasters that I've spoken to say there isn't any causation there. Sometimes you'll see correlation, but if you're banking on the social to drive lots of audio downloads, I don't think it's unlikely to work. So I'm not saying don't do it, but I just want you to be aware of the things that trip up a lot of businesses going into this. And honestly, a great way to sort of try to avoid these issues is to consider launching on YouTube, a video podcast as well. Obviously the discoverability is great. As Damo was saying just now, what's going to happen with Google search? So consider it, even though it's got the additional costs. So there are times when creating your own does make sense. And of course, these are generalizations, but I broadly see it through this lens. If you're a B2C company, it only really works in two cases. You need widespread interest in your niche. So examples of that would be Zoe with the health and fitness, or Patagonia, adventure, travel, etc. Or you're operating still B2C, but it's really high lifetime values, like the surrogacy we were talking about, and high trust is required. So a friend of mine runs this sort of elite estate agency in London, Russell Simpson, seriously expensive homes, and their podcast has been really successful. Again, not as lead generation, but conversion, because you've got to have a lot of trust in someone to go and sell your £10 million gaff. B2B makes more sense more often than B2C, but I would recommend not being like too on the nose. You can see here HubSpot Media, they're basically sort of building a network of shows, but it's not all on the nose of like content marketing. It's about, in this case, My First Million, how do you make some money? So have a think about, like, if you're going to go down this path of making your own show, what's the unique content value you can bring? Can you sustain it? And where would this podcast sit in your overall funnel? To be honest, I think most businesses shouldn't start with starting their own podcast. I think they should start here with basically landing some guest spots. It's much easier, and you can just see the results of getting some podcast coverage. The person on screen here is called Yota. She came on our podcast. She's a career coach who helps people get pay rises. She also helps founders with their build basically their personal branding, social media, etc. So she came on the show. She got a bunch of clients off it, and so she came to me a few weeks ago saying, can you help me pitch in to get onto other podcasts? And we're going to look at the podcast pitch that we helped put together for her. But first of all, you're sitting there, you're thinking, okay, want to get my founder, whoever it is, onto some great podcasts. There's some really important context to know. So in podcasting, you've probably heard of the Pareto principle, like 80-20 rule, 20% of the value gives 80% of the output, or 20% of the players get 80% of the rewards. In podcasting, it's even more extreme. There's so many that never make it, that it's more like the top 5% of podcasts have 95% of the audience, the spoils, etc. And so you only really want to be focusing on the category leaders. If someone tells you they've got a top 10% podcast, honestly, that's not amazing. So you're looking for the biggest, the best in the categories. Just use the chart, Spotify, Apple. But this isn't exhaustive. If you're going for a niche like, surgical instruments, you don't need to worry about the charts, but you're still looking for the best in the space. And then when you're picking these podcasts, you will If you're going down this route, there's no doubt agencies that can come to you and say, we will do the guest booking for you. They'll make your life easier because you don't need to do the work, but generally they'll do a bad job because their incentive really is to get you booked into shows. It's not what your real incentive should be, which is getting the most reach from the least number of appearances. It's obviously much better to go on one podcast where you get 1 million downloads than 10 where you get up like 100K. So go direct, you'll also learn a bunch. So then, you pick your podcast, build your spreadsheet. Then is the step that I think a lot of people don't actually pay enough attention to because they're just desperate to fire off the pitches. But the reality is, so like as producers, we see hundreds of pitches a month. Your pitch needs to be in the top 1% for us even to bother looking at it. And so if you don't take the time to do it, the whole thing is a waste of time. You're just trying to give producers what they want, like in all sales, and what they want is great conversations that are relevant for their audience. So you need to have a listen and start drafting some unique insights that your business, your spokesperson can deliver to that audience. If you come to the end of this exercise and you have one unique insight, but it's a good one, that is genuinely a great result. That's all a producer needs to like basically build an episode around you. If you get 3, even better. So then you've got your insights. This is the bones of a good pitch. And frankly, this works for a lot of different other forms of PR. So you want a banging subject line, say what it is, guest pitch, then get into it and give them that biggest punch, that unique insight that is going to make them want to click. It should also be instantly understandable. I can't tell you how many times I get a pitch, which is like pitch and then insert John Smith's name. Do you want to speak with this person? I've got no idea who that is. Never put someone's name in unless they're A-list and the person is basically guaranteed to know who it is. Much better to describe like elite athlete or something like that. And then your body, give that unique insight, always give examples, evidence, numbers, try to wrap it in a bit of story as well. That's what podcasts are all about. It's worth giving a nod as well that the person's a good speaker, they need to be able to speak well. At the same time, I'd be wary of saying they've been on this podcast, that podcast, and this, because then, maybe audiences have already heard them and they're looking for our producers are looking for unique, original content. Then this little bit here of additional value. I think if you're you're basically pitching to get your guests onto a podcast, presumably to drive some business. What we did with Yota, who's the career coach, is that we set up an affiliate model, which was basically, we knew that, we were confident that some people from our audience would want to go to her for help getting pay rises. When they do, we get paid a percentage of her fee. This is really rare within podcasting, and podcasts generally struggle to make money. So this is a power move for you as a business. It's win-win. If we get clients from being on your show, you get paid as well. So I'm not saying this is more important than content, your pitch, it's not. But if you've got a pitch and it's you against somebody else, but you're offering this, you're getting in on that show. Keep it short. Massive bugbear. This is true across all sales, I think, is fake personalization. Oh, loved your episode on X. We just know that it's come through, they've checked like whatever the previous episode was. It's much better just to get straight to the point. If you are going to do personalization, you have to do it properly. But I would say, honestly, it's not worth it. Just give them what they actually want, which is a great guest. No links either as well, because then you can get caught in the spam filters. So then, and I think this is true, to be honest, about a lot of copy that you might write. I think taking a break, genuinely sleeping on it, and then come back, have a look at your pitch, you'd be amazed by how much you can tune it up. In particular, you're trying to tune up the subject line. Most emails that you send are not going to get read. You need to change that. And then send it. Follow up a week later, a week after that, send 3 emails, and then maybe in 3 months' time. So I wanted to show you this pitch that I got 80% of the way with Yota, but I spoke to her a couple of days ago, she sent it over. Now the subject line here, I'll read it out. Guest pitch, how I've helped people get over £1 million in pay rises so far. I think that's pretty good. I actually think it can be better, and she's going to implement this feedback. She's actually helped over 500 people get pay rises. That's a good number to have in there. She's how I've helped 500 people get. And then she says get over £1 million in pay rises. What she really means there is she's helped individuals get £1 million pay rises, not in aggregate across the 500. So I've asked her to go away and think how many millions she's actually delivered in pay rises, so she can come up with a title which is like how I've helped over 500 people get over £70 million in pay rises. Me as a producer working on a show like Making Money, How to Make Money, I'd find that irresistible and I'd want to know how she's done it. And then she's got her unique insight down in here. She's saying, it's, down there, I'm going to include the 6-step process that I've gone through. So presumably in your business, there's something that you think is like domain expertise. That's why people pay you for what you're doing. If you can extract that thing and put it into a bite-sized chunk and give it to a relevant producer on a podcast, they should gobble it up. How to advertise. Last one in here. So, like a lot of things in podcasting, it really depends on the type of business that you are operating. Broadly speaking, it's a bit different if you're B2C and B2B, but let's just look for a minute if you're B2C and you've got low LTV. I will explain. Low lifetime value, too many acronyms. If you're going to consumers and you really care about price, you're probably going to care about the cost of the ads even more than the trust because you're limited by that. So just go to something like a network like Spotify, which is really commoditized, where you can pick up CPMs for like £5 or something like that. Give it a test, go on a bunch of shows. What will happen is you'll pre-record an ad that you upload that gets put on loads of shows. The higher though you go up, your business needs to go up this trust spectrum. Generally as well, like the higher the lifetime value and the higher the price that you're going to need to pay. And that's because, as I mentioned at the top, it's a really trustworthy medium, podcasting, and the best advertising mechanism for that is a host-read ad where the host says what they think about the brand because they've built up all this trust in themselves with the audience. Well, the audience believe them and they take action. Host reads, much more expensive. So instead of being like down in sort of like the £5, you can be getting up to sort of 40, 50, I've seen £100 CPMs. But sometimes if the audience is good enough, the engagement is good enough, the LTV, the lifetime value is there, it still makes sense. You get a good return on your ad spend. Another thing that I think is critical is go direct to the podcasts, even if they are represented by agencies. Because there's lots of agencies in podcasting who represent lots of podcasts. And what they're going to try to do is say like, don't worry, come to us, we'll deal with this. But you're going to be one of many people. You're trying to test if you can get this to work for your business. So you need to go custom to different podcasters and say, this is the kind of messaging, this is the kind of deal we want, and figure out actually what works for your business. You've got to find the right podcast. To be honest, it's not too dissimilar to finding the right ones where you want to pitch for guests. Use the charts, build your list, find the contacts. I think this point is really important. So I see a lot of marketers making this mistake, and it's different if you're, as I say, like low lifetime value and very transactional and cheap. This is less applicable. But if you're dealing in a high trust, high value area, then you need to do meaningful campaigns so that the people can hear your ad enough times. You should be looking at least 3 shows for your test. There's amazing variance in performance between shows, and you should be looking to hit each unique listener at least twice per show, because frequency is important to drive results. As Damo showed, I think it was 11 touch points or something with a brand to be able to convert. So then you've got your list, you've got some info from them, listen to their ads, do they sound good? Ask them questions, test them out. Often it's worth asking for screenshots as well. I've seen a lot of people in podcasting basically fudging their numbers for ads. I would recommend not going with the cheapest, even though it's tempting. Have a spread, particularly if you're testing it. See what some more expensive ones deliver. And then negotiate. So the list price you get given from a podcaster is always negotiable. You should go for at least 15%. That's because that's what media agencies, buying agencies will take as a commission. So they're automatically giving that to other buyers. but you can go for more. Negotiate to your heart's content. Then great ads. I mean, it's as you'd imagine it, to be honest. Tell a story if you can, bring some energy, make it sound natural, and let the host lead. What I often find with brands is they want to tell you exactly what to say and how to say it, and then basically you're not getting the best out of the natural qualities of this medium, which is that you've got a storyteller in the podcast and in the podcaster who's built trust with the audience. So give them, like the benefits of what your business does, but then let them fly with it. I did need to talk about tracking briefly. So it's a bit of a thorny topic, but again, there's a difference between B2C and then like the B2B world. But generally, unless you've got like a low value B2C product like a HelloFresh or something like that, where someone's listening to a podcast ad and they can decide, oh, actually, I fancy trying that out, for my dinner tonight, and can convert and use like the code. Normally what happens is that the conversion happens a long time after they've heard the ad. There's normally multiple touch points. So if you're B2B, you're considering like an ERP like Odoo, for instance. You don't just hear an ad and like, bang, I'm going to sign up straight away. You're like, oh, need to check that out, probably speak with some colleagues, look at a few different examples of it. And then once you do and you decide, oh, actually, I do want to give Odoo a go, then typically you won't then go and try to dig out that podcast where you heard that was like 10% off. I mean, we're talking B2B here. So what normally then happens is the person, often someone else in the company, will just go direct to Odoo, will go Google, get into Odoo and sign up from there. And you're not able to track that particularly well. So how do you do it? Well, I think best practice here breaks down to a few different things. Yes, you should have a custom URL or code to track some direct conversions. But the reality is most people won't go through that. So you need to track people who are coming in through Google, who are coming in through other channels, and ask them, how did you hear about us? I often see brands doing this part, but then giving a drop down to people with like podcast, whatever like the options are. And what generally people do is they'll click the first one or anyone because they just want to progress. The best practice here, and it's not just for podcasting, but across marketing, is have like an open text field that lets them answer. Then you get it's far more often that you get to the actual truth of the matter. Then also you need to add a multiple as well, because there's a lot of value that you're not able to track. It depends, you should do some measurements to figure this out. But Klaviyo, for instance, who did, they spent tens of millions of dollars a year on podcast advertising. They stopped giving out the custom trackable URLs because they realized less than 5% of conversions were happening through that URL. So there you have it, team. You've got 3 different ways to grow your podcast, or rather use podcasts to grow your business. You can create your own. That can particularly work if you're like high trust, high lifetime value consumer, or if you're B2B. You can guest on others. It's a pretty quick path to see what it's like. And then you can sponsor shows, which is the most scalable way. So you've got to choose an approach that fits your business. I've also been amazed since I entered podcasting. It's a very friendly area where you can ask anyone any questions. I'd be delighted to pay that forward. If you've got any questions about podcasting, you can book in a call there. Hopefully that works, because when I used it earlier, it sent me somewhere else. If not, use the email, please. Cheers.